Kia ora koutou. Welcome along. Welcome to this Q&A, live Q&A. We are live at 3 p.m. on Thursday, 24th of August, 2023, and we're here to talk about feedback. A great topic. I'm sure you've joined us with lots of questions about how feedback works, things you might want to know. We're here to help you. First of all, I'm Thomas McGrath, and this Q&A today is brought to you by Right Online, which is our live library of amazing microlearning videos that are made by wonderful consultants like Rebecca and Una, who we'll hear from very shortly. You can go to rightonline.co.nz and sign up for a free trial and see if it's for you. You can learn about some of the things that we're talking about today, but also a whole bunch of other stuff that we won't even have time to cover. Now, today is about you and your questions, so feel free at any point. You'll see the Q&A function down the bottom of your Zoom bar. You can click Q&A and type in a question for our lovely consultants today to answer. So without further ado, here are our special guests, Rebecca Barton and Una Cox. Rebecca, give us a little introduction so people know who they're listening to today.
Sure, thanks Thomas. Kia ora koutou everybody. I am Rebecca Barton. I am a consultant here at Right. So what I in particular do here is I'm in the documents team. So that is a lot of writing essentially. So every day I give and receive lots of feedback on my work and on others' work. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Lovely. Thank you for joining us, Rebecca. And Una, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Kia ora, everyone. My name is Una, and I am a bit different from Rebecca in terms of I come from our training team here at Right. So I come from a background of about scarily almost 20 years as an adult educator. Started off initially as a literacy teacher and then worked up as second language teacher into quality assurance, into inspection, which meant that I got quite a first hands-on approach with feedback styles, learning how to give it and of course to take it as well. With both of those things, then I think I've blended that giving and receiving of feedback just to come up with, I think, a style or a structure that's tested and tried and is always evolving. I think with feedback, you're always evolving as well. So that's a little bit about me. Lovely.
Thank you very much, Una. And for those folks who are watching today, if you've just joined us, this session's about feedback. It may be that you just are asked from time to time to have a look at something for a colleague, or maybe feedback and giving constructive criticism is actually a deliberate part of your job. However you interact with feedback, we are here to answer your questions. So down the bottom of the Zoom bar, you can see the Q&A function. Just click that and you can type in your questions, and our lovely consultants today will answer them. Now, I've asked as a first thing for us to do for Rebecca and for Una to give their top 3 pieces of feedback for all of you. So get your pen and paper out or get your typing fingers ready. Here are our top 3 tips to begin with, and then we're going to get into the questions from there. So Rebecca, tell us your top 3 tips for people out there who are wanting to write really good feedback.
Sure thing. I must admit it was quite hard to just pick 3, but here we go. Okay, so my first top tip for giving feedback is to be positive. So I don't mean that in a sense of only comment on positive things and give them positive feedback, because that's not always helpful. But what I mean by be positive is to firstly point out what the writer has done well. I think we can't underestimate how much positive feedback goes a long way. As someone who has worked on something quite closely or for a long period of time, it's nice to hear what works well. And I think this will encourage the writer or whoever it is to do more of that thing that you've pointed out that they've done well. Another way that I mean be positive is to use a positive tone when you're suggesting improvements or things that aren't working as well. Your tone is really important, and I think a positive and softer tone is received really well. So some examples of this is to avoid commands. So instead of saying you must do this or you should change this, try say something like you could consider this or try this. Yeah, just using the language that's a little bit more approachable and a bit softer. So that's the first top tip, be positive. The second one is be specific. So specific feedback, I think, is helpful feedback and will help the receiver take action the more specific it is. And this works for both providing positive feedback and also a bit more constructive feedback. So, for example, if you were giving feedback on headings, it's not really helpful to say something like, this heading doesn't work. Instead, when you're looking at providing feedback, ask yourself, why doesn't this heading work? So to be more specific, you could say something like, consider adding descriptive headings to communicate your main messages, or something, you know, that's just a bit more specific than saying this doesn't work. And yeah, the more specific, the more helpful I think your feedback will be. And my third top tip is to not make the feedback about you. So feedback based on a personal opinion is often quite hard to know what to do with, especially if there are multiple people providing feedback. You have kind of a clash of personal opinions that you're not sure what one to go with, which can be quite hard. So whenever you can, it's a good thing to base your feedback on evidence material or a source of truth that already exists out there, and you're kind of just pointing to it. So for example, this could be like a style guide that your organization has, or other guidance material of the like. Also something like digital.gov.nz for anything that's digital based, or just a little plug for our own plain language standard, which we have, which is a really good kind of guidance material that you can use to frame your feedback. And another way you can avoid making the feedback about you is to use framing from an audience's perspective. So instead of saying, I think that you should do this, you could say something like, as a reader, I would like to find out more about X, and kind of use that as a framework for providing feedback. So those are my tips. Be positive, be specific, and don't make feedback about you.
Fantastic. Wow. Powerful advice straight there. If you've just joined us, there's a wonderful piece of advice that you can take already. Now, Una, what are your top 3 tips? You could supplement what Rebecca has said.
I'll completely agree. First of all, with Rebecca's 3, very comprehensive and very useful for starting your process in feedback as well, and making it a successful process. So for me, in addition to those things, I think my number 1 is to prepare a brief. So a brief can be a briefing page, and we use examples like these on our peer review workshop. So they ask some of the key questions that helps you to get clear on what type of feedback you're looking for to start with, because feedback can be many things. So you want to manage expectations right from the start. With a briefing page, if it happens to be that, you can get clear about what the writer is looking for and set those expectations, set a time frame that's realistic for both of you, and also manage things about what stage the document is at in the writing process, how they would like to get that feedback at the end. Would they want it through track changes with comments? Do they want a face-to-face conversation? And when might be a good time to manage those things? That also gives you a nice tool to look back on at the end of the feedback process, where you go, this is what you asked for, this is what I did, and it's quite clear between you. So a clear brief in paper format or face-to-face. So that's the first thing, because of course we're all pressed for time nowadays. So it can just be a conversation. The second thing is about have a structure to your feedback. And what I mean by that is, in a nutshell, it's things like, what are the must need to change things with that document that the reader will learn more about straight away or get the meaning from straight away, versus the nice to know or the nice to change aspects. And to help you with that, I use like a traffic light analogy. And so we're just thinking here of the very basic green, amber, and red. So I'll recap on that first of all. So the green, a bit like Rebecca mentioned, start with those positives. Quite often you find people don't know what's good about their writing, and it's quite affirming for them to know that, oh, you write quite short paragraphs, you get straight to the point, you have a clear, informative purpose with a strong verb. So give them that to begin with. That's your green, so nothing needs to change. They're the green light areas that are good to go. So it's building that nice rapport. Then you're going you can take options. You can go with must know, which is your red, then the things they need to change. So those are the must changes. So things that could be factual inaccuracies with the table, with data, the whole structure. Maybe it's completely incoherent. Maybe there's no flow to it. So those things will have to change. And then you have the amber, which are the nice to haves. And that could be maybe there's too many difficult words. It could be plainer, more precise as well. And what I like about that structure, which in a nutshell is must knows and must changes versus nice to changes, is that you can decide, depending on that person's personality or style, you might start, they want to know straight away, hit me with what I have to change. So you can go straight in with the red light stuff. Or you might go, no, I'll build up, confirm what you're doing really well with your green lights, and then give that nice to know. And those nice to know is exactly when you would bring in Rebecca's words, like consider doing this, the reader might understand this better, suggest things as opposed to must do things and taking out the shoulds of the world as well. So that's my structure and specific approach to that. And specific examples there, and Rebecca's covered that as well, so I won't go into that. And my third one is just exactly similar. It's making it about, similar to Rebecca's in the sense of make it about the reader, set your own ego aside, take that I like this and I like that out of it, and just go. I think we all get comments like, well done, good job, great, but we don't know how to repeat that. If what does that look like, instead of the sections were clear, all of your, what could we say, word choice, things like that was very clear. When we're specific about that, then it's much easier for that person to repeat those good things as well. So make it about the reader, not about you, and link it to those standards, as Rebecca said. So first of all, to recap, because that's a lot, use a brief, either on page or as a conversation. Get very clear, and that's your go-to document at the end. Use a structure, must know changes versus your nice to knows. Traffic light might help you with that. And at the very end, then put yourself in the reader's shoes when you're delivering that as well. So as a reader, this didn't sound clear to me because of this. So take the I out of it as well and link it to standards.
Woo! Let's just finish there, shall we? I think we've covered everything. Okay, thank you both. What a start. Now, if anything that Rebecca or Una has mentioned that's got you thinking about a particular situation and you want to know an answer to your question, down the bottom, click on the Q&A function and you can add your question and we will answer it in real time. And we will get through as many questions as we possibly can. So let's go now to a viewer question. And the first one, I just want to give a shout out to Una Underhay, who said, sorry, not a question. First time I'm in a meeting with another Una. Most unusual. So big ups to Una. Must be good. It's the name of the day. Okay, and here's another one here from Anonymous Attendee. Tips for handling people who don't handle feedback well, even when we've used all the tips and techniques you've told us so far. So we'll see what we can do with this one. Thinking about the kind of people who will always fight or defend everything you've given feedback on, no matter how you deliver that feedback. So we all are sometimes that people ourselves. Maybe it's because we've worked on something and we really care about the work, we're really attached to it. Or sometimes people just close off to the idea of feedback. If we were going to give this person some ideas to work with the person or people they're describing, what would they say? Rebecca, is anything coming to mind for you?
That's a really hard one, honestly. I feel that completely. I've worked with people like that in the past, and it is really hard. I think a lot of it could depend on the type of relationship that you have with that person, and also how they have asked you to provide the feedback in the first place. You know, was it them themselves who actually asked you, or was it a manager who said to that person, hey, you need to get this looked at by someone else? So I think there are some kind of contextual things that could play into the person not really receiving feedback well. I think what I could suggest is just going back to one of my earlier points about providing evidence where you can. I think evidence is something that you can't really argue with if it's, you know, a good source of truth that has existed for a long time. I think that can be really helpful to kind of frame your feedback. I would also suggest, I know Una mentioned it earlier about how you provide feedback. So I think going back to kind of the old-fashioned way of you can't get better than a face-to-face conversation, I think that can be hard to do, but I think that will allow you to kind of read body language and maybe adjust your feedback and your tone depending on kind of how you're reading the situation. So yeah, I hope those are helpful. I know that those situations can be really, really tricky, but yeah.
Nice one. No, that's good advice. I think the face-to-face comment is a really good one, because often, especially in a much more digital environment, we tend to give more like we might give track changes or we might give written feedback, whereas it's hard to get the tone right always with that, isn't it? So face-to-face can sometimes do a lot for delivering the feedback in a more appropriate way. Una, have you got some another angle on this one or some other advice for us?
Yeah, I think it is quite difficult. You have some people who, I think firstly, our writing cuts straight to our heart. It's our biggest reflection of ourselves. So we can be so protective of that. And I think from the comments coming through, if someone is quite critical to that, it can be that they've had some past experience that hasn't gone well, or they can't see the purpose of the feedback. So outlining kind of from the beginning why that feedback is useful. Perhaps it's a big in-house document that's going out to the public, the purpose of that, the purpose or what will happen if they can't get it right, the impact, and all of those things, again, like managing the expectations from earlier, knowing what's required and making that quite clear so that you've established that from the start, because then you know exactly what's expected from both parties. But just be honest, I think, is also the key, and less is more sometimes, not to get stuck in the feedback, because you could explain how to rewrite a sentence to infinity and beyond, but be very clear. Just say what it is and no more. And sometimes people have to go away and look at that, but with standards, with evidence, being prepared, a clear purpose for the feedback, and also a shared organization view to the benefits of, be it peer review, be it feedback. It could sometimes mean some internal trainings needed for a shared understanding at a team meeting or something. Okay, why do we do this? What are the benefits of it? For me, I find it like free sales advice or consultancy. You know, here's somebody, a trusted colleague, telling you how to improve. It's not a inspector or police agent or somebody coming in looking to find something. Yep. You know, it's to prevent things coming back sometimes from the public questioning things again. And when you frame it in that sense, I think people are more open to it as well. But it does, we have lots of cultures and lots of different things to take into account as well, how people receive things, what people find is direct, what people find is indirect and fluffy, but linking it to a standard, being clear, less is more, and a shared understanding.
Fantastic. Great answers. Well, anonymous attendee, that one was for you. Okay, let's move on to, a few of you were asked about the what's the best way to give your feedback. Someone has asked here about what's the best, another anonymous attendee has asked what's the best way to handle back and forth comments in a document review. And Patricia Lawrenson, thank you for your question. Bearing in mind that you said ask the writer what form of feedback they want, do you have any thoughts on track changes versus comments versus highlighting or other options? So maybe Una, could you start us off on this one? What would you say are some of the most helpful forms of giving feedback? So is track changes good? Would you say write a comment? Would you say face-to-face? And then maybe let's talk about some of the traps that we find in some of that back and forth that you can get into very easily in feedback.
Okay, so if we start with a hard document, if someone prefers to go old school like myself sometimes and just go at it with a highlighter or a pen, then be very careful you don't create a bloodbath of red pen over a page. You might want to choose, there is psychology behind that as well. So you might want to choose the most important changes only. You're not going to highlight every single error, but you're just going to look for patterns of the same type of thing. Maybe it's all paragraphs are quite long, but you're not going to highlight all of those. You're just going to pick out a sample or two, and yeah, use the right pen color to communicate that. So that would work in a face-to-face. With track changes, as long as they're being used in addition to or with comments is the best way to use those. And also deciding when and when not to switch them on in terms of whether to have it on for all formatting and all structural changes or just for those language element changes, because it can look like too much has changed and quite disheartening for a writer to get back. So you might want to agree with them in advance that I'm going to switch it off for structural things that I've moved the order around. I'll switch it off for heading styles, bullets and things like that, because then it just changes beyond recognition. And it looks like it's been absolutely destroyed by the feedback person. But when you just pick out the ones you want, plus give reasons in the comments as to I've changed this because the reader might be confused, or there's too many conditions, the reader might know what was the main condition in those exceptions or whatever it happens to be. I think use comments with track changes and encourage the writer then to look back on the original view of you can use the different views on track changes versus maybe a simple markup versus a detailed one. So then they can see how that change has come across. So yeah, use it wisely. And then face-to-face, perhaps sometimes you might say, we're all busy, we work remotely, maybe you're giving feedback to somebody in another part of New Zealand, in which case you'll email that, but you'll make sure your covering email has clear details with nice clear subheadings as to why the changes were made, but also that human tone in it as well. So keep your human tone, keep it in the essence of improvement. Ultimately, you want to leave the person intact at the end.
Yeah.
Better than you
wanting to work
them.
with you.
Yeah, wanting to work with you, better than you find them, and also motivated to make the changes. Yep. So if you've decimated it and destroyed it and track changes, they're not motivated anymore. So have the comments. Yeah, and that will encourage improvement over time. They can save those track documents and go, oh, I received that from Una before. I've had that same change over and over again. Because of course, I'm not going to lie, we're all very tempted to hit accept all on our track changes, but we don't learn anything without the comments. So that would be my...
Lovely, very good point, Una. And I think also coming back to Rebecca's point about keeping positive, sometimes people can use track changes for pointing out good examples of things that they see. It's not always for noting things that you want to get rid of or bad examples of anything. Rebecca, track changes, giving written bits of feedback, any tips or traps for our viewers to avoid?
I think I echo everything that Una said. I think that was a great summary. I think part of that question was about kind of how to avoid a bit of a feedback loop, maybe, I think. So yeah, that does happen quite a lot and it can slow things down. What I would say for a tip around that is to have one point of contact if you're working with a group of people who are all providing feedback. I think going back to what Una said about managing those expectations right from the start, that we just want feedback from one person who has collated everyone's views and kind of agreed for the most part, and presenting it to you as kind of one bit of feedback. Yeah, that's what I would say to that.
That's really good advice. Okay, lovely. Our time is rapidly moving. We've got a couple more questions to get through before we finish up. One here is about managing feedback around, well, there's a couple of questions here around short time frames. Sometimes people are needing to give feedback, with not a lot of time. And sometimes I think the temptation is to go in and just start at the very first word and see how far you get. Rebecca, what advice would you give to someone if they're working on a piece of feedback for someone, they need to give some feedback and they don't have much time? What would you do?
I would prioritize. So I would, going back to those managing expectations from the beginning, I would ask the person who I'm giving feedback on kind of what they want me to look at in particular. If they if it's kind of a broad or vague, can you just review this? Try and get them to be a little bit more specific about what you actually want, what they want you to review. So is it, can you make sure that my headings are all consistent, or can you make sure my sentences are all short and nice and easy to read? So I think prioritizing the things that will make the most difference. Sometimes you may be able to identify that yourself, but sometimes you may need to kind of agree early on with that person on, you know, hey, I don't have enough time to do a full review on this, so here's what I suggest, or what would you like me to most focus on? I think that would, yeah, prioritization, I would say.
Nice one. Yep. And Una, anything to add on that one? People working with short time frames?
Short time frames, again, yeah, just be clear and perhaps say, okay, I have 2 days, I can get this back to you by Friday. In that time, I'm only going to be able to look at the big picture elements, so your purpose, your content, your structure, and headings, if you're lucky. Is that okay? Agree that in advance. It's not going to get into an edit, it's not going to get into a proofread. So yeah, just manage it and keep it focused.
Yep, lovely. Okay, here's an interesting question from Deepti. Hi, Deepti. How can managers cultivate a culture of giving and receiving constructive feedback? Question based on past experience. So I guess it's one of those questions where a lot of managers do set the tone about how do you receive feedback? You know, what's the humble way to accept that you need to do something different? Do either of you have any tips for people in any kind of management positions? If they really want feedback to be an important part of their culture, what should they do? Una, I'll start with you.
I think they should welcome feedback in the sense of with open arms, invite questions, ask questions and invite questions. And don't make assumptions. Part of the thing with feedback and writing, we look at things and we assume, oh, they haven't done this and they haven't done that again. And da, da, da. Instead of saying, oh, why did you put that a piece of information there and not there? And why did you leave that out? And when you start to have an open question approach to the feedback and make it, we're here to improve, this is, you know, where we've come from, there's a bit of distance traveled, and you can see those changes and what would I say, an improvement action plan coming out of feedback, then you know the feedback gets taken seriously. Sometimes people lose the heart in it when they don't say, oh, I've fed back these things before and nothing changes. Okay, well, how are you feeding it back? What questions are you asking? So make a culture of feedback a good thing where people are okay with questions, people see improvement as the outcome of the feedback. And then from there on, I think you don't want a shopping list style, you want it to be specific and focused, but yeah, make it question-based and yeah, welcome it from a manager down. And that goes down because everything trickles down the ladder as well. So if it's welcomed from above, then it should be welcomed from below and vice versa.
Lovely. Okay, Rebecca, anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I think what Una said was spot on. I also think that feedback is collaboration. I think often people can see feedback as kind of a critique of something that you've worked really hard on, but it's not that at all. It's actually collaboration. And I think work that comes out of getting feedback is actually a better product because it's had another set of eyes on it. It's had you know, a completely another lens on what you've done. So I think, yeah, I think exactly what Una said, create a culture of collaboration and welcoming other people's point of views and experience and knowledge as well.
Lovely. Great advice. Okay, we have time for 2 final questions. Here is one from Simone. This is an interesting one. How would you open a conversation with someone who has not asked for feedback? So maybe you've noticed documents come across your desk, you've read an email, you've found something. How would you start that conversation to know that that person or that document needs something said about it? Rebecca, any advice on that one?
I might pass on to Una.
That's cool. That's cool. Anything to say, Una? That's fine.
It's an interesting one. So if something arrived at my desk, I might be tempted to say, oh, where has this come from? Do you know what stage in the process it's at? Is it a live document? Again, I'm going to ask those questions. I'm not going to make assumptions. And when I kind of dig a wee bit, I might go, oh, perhaps we could review it against our standards in-house just to make sure it's consistent with everything else we're putting out there, and come at it from a very like, okay, where did it come from? Just ask the questions and don't make assumptions, and see if there's something glaring. Of course, we have to call it, because it's a reputation of the organization as well. And then that conversation follows.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, lovely. Yeah, it's a tricky question, but we're here to answer them. Now, here's the final question, and I'm going to do a very difficult thing and get you to say this is a yes/no answer question only. Okay, because we are at 3:30, so our time is up. Our final question. Is the compliment sandwich a good thing or a bad thing? Yeah, is it good is the question, and it's yes or no. Una, the compliment sandwich, something really, really nice, something very, very critical, followed by something very, very nice. Is it good?
Yes.
Okay, and Rebecca, is it good?
I'm going to disagree slightly and say no.
Okay, and now I'm going to allow you a little bit of a comment. Una, what's your comment? Why do you think it's good?
And that's why I was struggling with the yes, because I was going to say yes if I think you have to know the person you're delivering to know what those positive things are. You can't have anything condescending or patronizing at the start. It has to be not great job, well done, like I mentioned earlier, specific. The title was good, this document was good because it was concise and clear. So I think take away the kind of vagueness from it, but choose when to do it, because of course, as I mentioned earlier, starting with the green lights of your structural system, some people don't know, no one's ever told them. And how do people know what good looks like if no one has ever told them what good looks like before? We only know what we know. So sometimes you have to point out the good in the work, give them those positives. And then, of course, we go into it. There's one piece of research, I'll just say on that it comes from the organization 9Ps, and it takes apparently 3 positives to cancel every negative piece of feedback you give. So without that top of that positive sandwich, feedback sandwich, constructive sandwich, whatever you want to call it, without that top layer, then you're automatically going to be, what would I say, running against the grain again to make that relationship, to build that rapport, to build that connection. So if you're not a positive person, well then dig deep to get that top part of your sandwich, because research shows it does save in the long run.
Okay, and Rebecca, the last response on this one is yours.
I think maybe I was a little harsh saying no. I think the compliment sandwich is fine. I just think I know that it can come across as a little bit inauthentic. I think maybe people can kind of see through it a little bit, and it can sometimes be misinterpreted as kind of, oh, you're trying a little bit too hard. But I do agree with what Una said. I think it depends on the context. It depends on the person and the relationship that you have. I think it can be a fine way to present feedback, but maybe don't make it so obvious.
Yes, lovely. Okay, well, that is all the time we have. Thank you very much, Rebecca. Thank you very much, Una, for joining us and for your wonderful expertise today. Thank you all for joining us as well. Hopefully that you have had your questions answered and got some good advice to take back to your workplace, or maybe you're just giving feedback at home. Who knows? Now, remember that this Q&A has been hosted by Write Online, which is where our wonderful consultants make short videos about all sorts of things to do with communication, and it could help you out in your job. Go to writeonline.co.nz and you can sign up for a free trial and see if it's for you. But for us today, that is us. Go well, use plain language, go to the Plain Language Act, and we'll see you all shortly. Bye-bye.